What is up, everyone? It is Smatherini, also known as Cinders of Hope. Today, I wanted to talk about Yu-Gi-Oh's most annoying mechanic, hand traps. What are they? Hand traps are... Hand traps are a specific type of card, typically a monster that is played from the hand, that has a quick effect that can stop your opponent from taking a certain action or remove certain cards from play, depending on how it works. So, it all depends on what card you're playing. So, and on top of these hand traps, I'm going to talk about some counterplay cards that can help you either regain your momentum after being hit by one, or how to simply stop them from activating, as most of them need to be sent to the grave in order to activate in the first place, meaning you can hit them with effects like Called by the Grave. We'll get more specific in just a minute. So, I'm going to talk about why hand traps are useful and why they are also a problem in Yu-Gi-Oh! The only hand traps that are being played in the active meta that are not shown in this video here are the Mulcharmy cards, so let me briefly run those cards down. Each Mulcharmy allows you, depending on a certain action that you or your opponent takes as a player, so you can draw a card. For the most common one played, and really the only one being played, is Mulcharmy Foralos, or it's a tongue twister to say. It's like Forwalos or Foralos, it's something like that. It's a blue little bubble fish creature. It could be really easily mistaken for something from the Tearlaments archetype if you didn't know any better. It is a general hand trap. You send it to the grave, and every time your opponent, I'll just phrase it as your opponent, unless it's being played against you, then it is you. The opponent of the player who activated the Mulcharmy card. Every time they special summon a card, your opponent gets to draw. Meaning, if your opponent is running cards like Ash Blossom, Droll and Lockbird, Artifact Lancia, Imperm, Veiler, Effect Veiler, or even the Bestial monsters, they can draw into those cards and stop. Or even something as simple as Crossout Designator, and if they're running the same deck, they can literally banish a card and negate that. We'll talk about the counterplay cards. And these over here are some cards that I would suggest either if we are not going to use the ban list to solve the hand trap problem, cards that we can bring from the ban list to stop the hand trap problem in the first place. So, I'm going to go from kind of least to less annoying to really needs to be removed from active play. Now, essentially, the reason why the Mulcharmy cards, to summarize, since I really didn't make that point clear as I'm now realizing, your opponent can draw into a bunch of crazy overpowered stuff like a hand trap or a counterplay card or something. Now, these are quick plays, but I'm calling them counterplay because they counter certain actions that your opponent is taking against you. More on that later. Also, this is a counterplay, and this one is both a hand trap and a counterplay, making it doubly as annoying. So, where to begin? But the whole goal is they can draw into hand traps or just more stuff to fuel their next turn, meaning they could probably build a stronger board if they're drawing into all of these different ones. Now, certain ones are better than others in active meta, but let's talk about probably these first two here that are probably the least effective currently, however, are still sometimes played but annoying. These two are DD Crow and Dimensional Shifter, or Dimension Shifter. So each of these will banish cards in its own way. Now, this one recently got limited because it was really, really powerful at one point. Dimension Shifter used to be played in Malice, which is the deck I'm actively playing. By the way, I need to revise the Malice Fiendsmith video. Don't put Fiendsmith in Malice. It is actually what was slowing down my deck and making it worse. So, however, I will be working on a new Fiendsmith deck eventually, or retiring it to the collection binder where I will keep it until it is time to really play it well. But let's talk about D-Shifter, why it got limited, and why it's kind of good. D-Shifter. Now, depending on which copy you get, this guy comes in a variety of different prices, depending on which one you get. But overall, let's talk about the effect. If you have no cards in your graveyard, so essentially this is played on your turn. This is a quick effect, meaning it's like a quick play spell. It's activated on your opponent's turn. For a Magic player that's getting into Yu-Gi-Oh, it's played at instant speed. For people who don't understand. So, Yu-Gi-Oh lingo, because it's almost like speaking another language. Instant speed is the Magic term. I don't know the Pokemon one. Essentially, you send this to the graveyard, from your hand to the graveyard, and until the end of the next turn, any card that hits the grave is banished instead. Malice plays off of the fact that they can summon themselves back from... All the Malice monsters can summon themselves back from banishment unless they are counterplayed. So essentially, all you have to do is play Dimension Shifter at the start of your turn. Any like hand trap or something that your opponent's playing or a Molcharmy is banished, and I don't know if that would counter their effects or if they still get the effect. But either way, you'd essentially just, anytime your Malice monster would hit the graveyard, it would be banished, and then you just summon it back and use it as infinite fodder. It would lead to weaker end boards, but still be a one-card starter for Malice, making it a massive pain to go up against. That's Dimension Shifter. DD Crow banishes one singular target from the grave, and that's it. It's literally just target opponent's monster in grave, banish it. That's the whole thing. So these two right here are obviously not being played because, one, this one got put on the limited list, which is the only hand trap as of recent to ever receive a limit or some sort of control factor, unlike the others we'll be talking about later. So, that's those guys. Now let's talk about Ghost Ogre. This one is somewhat played, but not played a lot. It is a simple effect. When your opponent activates a monster effect, you blow it up. Essentially, and assuming that the effect activates on summon, you can blow up that specific monster, and it's really iffy on whether, or it's a card that has to be initially on the field before the original activation. I don't know how long specifically, but it has to be immediately on the field before you activate it. Meaning, now, if your opponent, plays a spell card by setting it on the field, that you cannot hit it with Ghost Ogre. It has to be actively set or face up on the field. Then you can counter it. Is it face up? It has to be already face up on the field, so a continuous spell. Or, hell, you could probably even hit field spells. I do have a field spell right here. We'll get into what that one does in a little bit, why people hate it, and why it would be good. So essentially, and this can cause certain effects like this one or others if they are activated as a trigger to just completely fizzle out if they have to be on the field to actively resolve it. If it is something like an on summon, you can't really chain to it and your opponent can resolve and can actively resolve it. I know it's confusing, it's ass backwards, roll with it, I'm not the one who made the card. Blame Konami. So, let's talk about the two that negate specifically monster effects next. Effect Veiler and Infinite Impermanence. While this one is a bit more limited, it is still a massive pain to play under. Veiler is simply negate a monster's activated effect until the end of the turn, and all the other effects of that monster are negated. But she has the caveat of only being able to activate during your opponent's main phase, meaning if they hit battle, that's it. However, so However, infinite permanents can not only be played from the hand if you control no other cards, meaning on your opponent's turn, if you have it in hand, you can negate stuff. However, you can set this and make it more annoying, because if it's set on the field, a spell card that is set in the back row of whatever row this card is set in, so if it's set middle or any of the side rows in your spell and trap zone, it negates a spell card in that back row for an entire turn. But this one also negates a monster's effects till the end of the turn. So, the only time these two are ever like specifically fizzled is if it's a once per copy, not just a once per turn. Which once per copy and once per turn, really confusing and almost never comes up in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And sometimes it does with older cards being played in newer decks. It's annoying, it's weird, it's confusing, and never makes any sense. But overall, just annoying in general. Let's talk about a couple of others. I'm just going to start introducing these in twos, just because now there's technically a third one that I should have introduced with the banishment one, but we'll get to that because it's kind of its own beast in its own right. So let's talk about Ghost Mortar and Moonlight Chill. Or Moonlit Chill. Essentially, your opponent special summons a monster that is face up, except during the damage step. You can discard this card, choose one of the special summoned face up monsters your opponent controls, negate its effects till the end of the turn, and if that face up monster leaves the field, your opponent takes the original attack points as damage. This is once per turn, thankfully, but still. So your opponent has like an important synchro or XZs or link material that they have to use. Your opponent is now going to take that damage from its original attack as life point damage. Or if you can battle and destroy the monster and it leaves the field, your opponent also takes the original attack as life points from their life points as well. So, overall, Ghost Mortar, annoying, but also not played very often. Artifact Lancia. So, say you've got a card that vanishes from the deck. Whilst this has another effect, and it's obviously an archetype piece, this is being played for its hand trap ability. You send it to the grave, your opponent cannot neither player can banish cards for the entire turn. So this is used to counter decks like Malice, and I can understand why this one specifically is being played. This one, whilst annoying to specifically Malice players and anyone who needs to banish to make certain plays work, very annoying, but overall kind of a mid-level, more situational against one deck sort of thing. Unless it's a deck that runs the Bestial monsters, which we'll talk about now. So, Bestials. Their whole gimmick is light and dark monsters in your graveyard can be banned in either graveyard, can be banished to to special summon these monsters from your hand. And if your opponent controls a monster, it becomes a quick effect. These are being played in anything from Blue Eyes, just as extra dragons, and there's one, it's the red one, not this blue one here, Bestial Magnamut, that can search out the certain other dragons, allowing you to combo into different plays. So, very annoying overall. However, playing a deck that does not focus around light and dark monsters and playing something with the earth, wind, or water attribute can get around being hit with Bestials. This is also being mostly played in Malice as easy banishment fodder to once again initiate the resummon effects and get an extra body for link materials out on the field. Next, onto the possibly three more annoying and possibly worse. Now, these two are basically the same. This one focuses on the deck, this one focuses on the graveyard. However, this one can stop entire turns just by being activated against certain decks. These two specifically really need to be put on the forbidden list, or at least limited to one copy, as they are the worst cards to be put up against as a hand trap, as they are basically like, if I can't draw two cards using Pot of Greed, I shouldn't be able to play these two either. Same with cards like Super Polymerization, which can technically be a counter card, but not as big right now. So, let's talk about Ash Blossom. So, Ghost Belle does everything from the graveyard. Ash Blossom mostly focuses on your deck. So, she'll stop you from adding a card from deck to hand, special summoning from the deck, or sending a card from the deck to the graveyard. Ghost Belle... This is Ash Blossom, Ghost Belle. Anyway, but just in case I didn't say that already, add cards from your graveyard to the hand and or extra deck. Okay? So essentially this can stop Fiendsmith from returning stuff to the extra deck. Special summon a monster from the graveyard or banish a card from the graveyard. So, essentially, it can counter Malice. She's not really being played right now, which is fine. She's actually not very good in this format. However, this one will end entire turns. Let me explain. Whilst Ash can just stop you from making one main combo and having to reroute a strategy, Droll and Lockbird, for those of you who don't know, this bastard, can stop you from adding from deck to hand except by drawing cards for an entire turn. Most decks these days, including Hero, Blue Eyes, Malice, Ryziel, and a whole bunch of other strategies, require you to add important cards from your deck to your hand. Your opponent hits you with Droll and Lockbird, and you can't, and those decks that I listed cannot play through this card. Meaning if you don't have an initial board before someone hits you with Droll, you cannot play. You are left defenseless and unless you have Called By, Crossout, or Crossout Designator, or some other in-graveyard effect negation. You cannot play through it, and it stops your entire turn. Your opponent builds a giant board and claps back and kills you in one move. In essentially one big turn. Droll and Ash Blossom specifically really need to get hit, as they are not only overplayed, overdecked, but they are also run at 3 copies, meaning you can draw them extremely easily. Now, Valor is being played, but mostly in Blue Eyes as a level 1 light tuner, as a 1-card starter for other strategies. It's weird, it's annoying, it sucks. But these two specifically are the worst two to be put up against. I'm running them in my own deck, so I have a survivability chance, or I can activate my Crossout Designator, banish one of these two, and negate the activation from my opponent. We need to really hit these guys, put them on the forbidden list, and let us play the goddamn game. But no, it's agreed by a lot of people, especially the people I talk to at my locals, that Droll and Lockbird, and just in general, cards like that, you can't really play through. Now, there's one other that I'm on take 2, for those of you who actually care, and I forgot to get out the infamous Rock. This one is really specific to Malice or any deck that summons more than 5 times per turn. Nibiru the Primal Being, if your opponent normal or special summons at least 5 monsters, this is just an automatic board wipe. They get a token that's worth that you can summon, and that the player who's summoning Nibiru, gets to choose how the token monster is summoned. But Nibiru it blows up every monster on the field. So if you have an initial board, that's fine. It's going to take your monsters too. But most of the time, it's being played against your opponent when they summon 5 monsters total, meaning you just get to eat up their entire board and start over. Now, it's only monsters, so if they have spells and traps, they stay. Which means decks like Labyrinth, unless you're running Fiendsmith in it, are really safe against this. But to be honest, there are so many strategies to counter Labyrinth in the first place that it's not funny. I mean, like, Labyrinth players get chewed up and spit out at regional tournaments like it's nothing. Like, seriously. Like a really poor quality steak. That's the way you're chewed up and spit out if you're playing Labyrinth. Now, so, essentially, the issue is now. I said that there was an issue with the way hand traps are being played and the way they are allowed to be played. The issue is you can stack all of you could have a deck that has a tiny core. You could literally just have the base Fiendsmith archetype. Something that is more of a sub-archetype that is support for decks that don't have a lot of on-field effect negation. And then stack the rest of your deck with all of these different hand traps with basically no limitations other than Dimension Shifter is set to 1 copy and no one's running Dimension Shifter at the current time. When he comes back to full power, I'm sure there will be a deck that utilizes the hell out of that card. But right now, this would all be well and good if the main cards that were... And the other issue is that all of the main cards that are being used to counter play these hand traps are limited to 1 or don't negate anything in grave. Now, these two specifically, Triple Tactics Thrust and Talent, are cards that if your opponent activates a card effect on your turn, these are your bounce backs. Essentially, they allow you to set... This one allows you to set a spell or trap. Or, if your opponent controls a monster, this one just allows you to go ahead and bring a monster to your hand instead. So, essentially, either set traps if your opponent doesn't have spells, or traps if your opponent doesn't have a monster, meaning you could go Triple Tactics Thrust into Crossout Designator or Called By, or even Forbidden Droplet, or one of your main combo spells. Meaning, if you're hit with Ash Blossom, you have a way of kicking back off of that if it's in hand. Same with Triple Tactics Talent, which, if you look at the art on Thrust, the weapon shown in Talent is the one in his hand, in the Samurai's hand here. Triple Tactics Talent has 3 different effects. If your opponent activates a card effect on your turn, either draw 2 cards, take control of a monster, or dump a card back into your opponent's deck from their hand. So, this one is at 3. A bunch of decks are running this. Malice, Blue Eyes. I don't know if Ryziel runs it. I don't really care about Ryziel. Mainly because I never see anyone play it. Though it is technically the bigger of Malice and Ryziel, even it's kind of like how Snake Eyes was more powerful than White Forest situation. And my guess is that Ryziel will probably get the Snake Eyes treatment later at the end of the year. That's a whole other discussion for another day. So, the issue... Now, like I said, there's not enough counterplay unless you can establish a board to stop these hand traps in the first place. Now, this would all change if Called by the Grave and Crossout Designator were brought back to 3 copies instead of just 1 in the deck. Forbidden Droplet is on-field negation, meaning if your opponent's trying to negate a monster from your... So, let's talk about this one, because this one's at 3, and I've already discussed what these two do. Let's get the one that isn't... Let's get the main, counterplay cards to on-field out of the way. Forbidden Droplet will stop you from... or your opponent from negating monster effects. So it's a quick effect. So let me slow down. It's a quick play spell that, depending on the cards you discard from your hand or field, say I have a bunch of spells and a couple of a monster, and I discard like these 3 to the grave, I can negate up to 3 monsters on my opponent's field. Yes, it's only monster negate, so if they clap back with another spell that stops it, spell or trap that stops your droplet, you're fucked. But whatever cards are discarded as cost, your opponent can't respond with. So if you discard a monster or a spell or a trap card, your opponent can't respond with that specific card type. Meaning, if you're discarding an Imperm, a Triple Tactics Talent, and a DD Crow, Droplet will say, "Oh, that's cool." Your opponent can't respond with any sort of card effect to the negation, and then you can negate like a bunch of on-field things. So that's Droplet. It's a really fun negation spell. Let's talk about the big 2 cards that could really, really fix certain issues if they weren't limited to 1 copy, or put on the limited list for the people who prefer the fancy terminology. Called by the Grave. Called by the Grave. So, as I said, a bunch of these activate by sending them to the grave. Actually, almost every hand trap on this roster activates by sending it to the grave. Called by says, "Oh, you're going to send a card to the... You're activating a card effect that initiates once it hits the graveyard? No. I'm going to negate that effect, and I'm going to banish that card that you activated." So meaning you could banish the Lancia, Ash Blossom, or even your opponent's Droll and Lockbird. However, the issue is this one is limited to 1 copy per deck, meaning you have to get lucky enough to draw this in your starting hand if you're going first, or just have it in general when your turn comes around, in order to outplay what your opponent is playing. And because it's quick play, you can set it on the field and then play it, but you can't activate it from your hand during your opponent's turn. So that's Called By. It's essentially hand trap counters, except it's really, really hard to get. It's also why you want to run Crossout Designator, because it's almost the same card, except you're banishing 1. If you have the exact same card, say I've got 3 Droll and Lockbird in my deck, so this works out perfectly, because this was a play that I did earlier against kind of my locals rival per se. I played Crossout Designator. So, from your deck, you take your Droll and Lockbird, or it was actually with Imperm, but we'll use Droll. You banish your copy of Droll and Lockbird, and your opponent's activated Droll and Lockbird that they played against you becomes negated, and then you can continue on with your build. However, once again, the issue is it's limited to 1, making it damn near impossible to either draw this out of the vast amount of cards, considering that even if you're at the hard 40, there's still 39 other cards that you can draw other than this, or other than you're Called By, or something like that. Meaning it gets harder to pull those cards. Now then, I mentioned that I'd bring these into play. Now, we're going to start talking about solutions. These cards are some of the solutions. So, the first solution, and the simplest one, is Konami can actually, instead of hitting the main archetypes in the main decks, they can start hitting the sub-support. They can start hitting, well, other than Bestial, they've already hit this one enough to where these are all, like, almost every Bestial monster other than Bestial Baldrake is limited to 1. Oh, and Lubellion, but you have to run a whole bunch of stuff to play Lubellion in the deck anyway, so it doesn't matter. Plus, Druid Swarm, Magnemite and Baldrake are already being played in their own right, mostly all at 1. And when I say at 1, that means at 1 copy, for those of you who either just didn't initially pick up on that or don't understand Yu-Gi-Oh lingo or card game lingo. Anyway, so your first solution is to put these on the forbidden list or limit them to 1 copy per deck. Preferably forbidden, because these are still drawable even if they are limited to 1, and considering that at least one of these can kill an initial strategy and turn startup, it's just not the most ideal, but it can be a workaround. The next solution, and this would benefit all players, meaning they could counter any one of them and may make the problem worse, but that would mean you'd actually have to unban the but unlimiting the big 2 counters to most of the hand traps, being Crossout Designator, Called by the Grave, bringing them up to 2 copies or 3 copies instead of just 1 per deck. Though I doubt Konami is going to ever do that. The next one is unbanning these 2 specific cards, as they can really outplay certain effects. The first one is a field spell called Mystic Mind. Essentially, if your opponent has more monsters than you, essentially, if your opponent controls, is it more cards or more monsters? If your opponent controls more monsters than you do, your opponent cannot activate card effects or declare an attack or monster effects. So, meaning it's still clearable by cards like Harpy's Feather Duster, which is another counterplay card that I forgot to bring in. It's literally just remove all spells and traps on your opponent's side of the field. It's really self-explanatory. It's one of the oldest cards in Yu-Gi-Oh history. Mystic Mind, what is actively on the ban list, and if you heard that card effect and understand why that's insanely overpowered, you know exactly why this is on there. However, the caveat is if you control more monsters than your opponent, you can't activate card effects. So, and I had a funny strategy for a tournament that allows you to, that would stack these 2 together. But let's talk about the other one. Appaloosa, Bow of the Goddess. A Link 4 monster, meaning you need 4 monsters or 2 Link 2s or a Link 3, or a Link 3 monster and 1 other monster to match the total value. Now, Appaloosa, once per chain effect. So, essentially, I'm adding from deck to hand. My opponent's chaining all these card effects are chained to an initial activation. It starts a chain link of effects, essentially. You're linking the chains as you go along through the play, essentially. A chain is simply just a long stretch of multiple card effects activated at once. But you chain all of these to different effects. However, here's the thing. Appaloosa, once per turn, she'll pay attack points, which she gains with the total of monsters 800 becomes 800 times the number of link materials used for the link summon. So 800 times 2 would get you, that would be like 1600, but if you used 3 different monsters, a link 2 and 2 just other smaller monsters, you can get up to like 3200. She can stack up to a lot of attack points. But once per effect chain, you can negate a card effect within that chain. So essentially, your opponent activates Ash Blossom, and they're trying to stop you, but you have Appaloosa Boa, the goddess, on the field. You can activate that, chain her effect, and negate the Ash Blossom since it was an activated effect in that chain. Yeah, and you remove 800 attack, and if you do, negate the activation of the effect. So, however, both of these are on the ban list for their own unique reasons. She will probably never come, neither of these will most likely never come off the ban list because they are extremely powerful, and if you can build some insane setups off of just these 2 cards alone, hell, you can put them both in the same deck, and as long as you have a deck that can summon a shit ton of monsters all at once, meaning like decks like Snake Eyes, which is why she got banned last year, Appaloosa could just be immediately summoned out because Snake Eyes just dumps monsters onto the field when played properly. And it's such an accelerated rate that it's uncanny. But yeah, so Appaloosa, especially with Malice being a link deck and being able to build into her really easily, it's almost a guarantee that she won't be put into the game. And Mystic Mind's effect is just really, really overpowered. However, those are just my card suggestions that could fix the hand trap issue. However, that is all up to Konami and whether or not they want to fix the problem to begin with. So that's the reason why hand traps, those are a bunch of different hand traps. That's why they're good, and some counterplay cards. That's why they're good. That's why they're really good, but also becoming but why hand traps are also becoming a massive problem in Yu-Gi-Oh! Play. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, share, subscribe. And if you like Yu-Gi-Oh!, I have a whole myriad of different videos, including some deck lists that I have. I will probably be revising Malice. Have a good one.